In this Marvel's Midnight Suns video, I'm going to be sort of doing a heroes overview, going through all the 13 heroes you can get in the game, sort of going over their playstyle and their strategies. I'm not going to be getting into their cards in a lot of detail. We obviously have very specific guides for those, but I just kind of want to give you a heads up on how these characters can play, as well as show you the heroes in action. So to start with, there are 3 different types of characters in this game. There are support characters, there are damage dealer characters, and there are tank characters. The support characters can still deal damage, but they have a focus on augmenting the damage of other players or giving them advantages in combat, and they sort of supplement any damage dealer. Then you have damage dealers who tend to focus on drawing their own cards specifically and using just those cards in combat. So a support character might help them draw those cards or increase the damage of those cards, but a damage dealer is going to focus solely on using their cards most of the time. And then you have tank characters, which are focused on taunting enemies and absorbing damage while staying alive, as well as dealing damage, so that your other party members or the people in your group aren't taking damage and they're free to do their thing. So first, let's look at the 3 support characters in this game. Those are Nico, Doctor Strange, and Scarlet Witch. So Nico's gimmick is that many of her cards are RNG based, meaning that the effects that they do are pulled from a small pool, or the damage values that those cards do are randomized from a small pool, so you never quite know whether the card is going to be very effective when you draw it or absolutely useless, which can make her difficult to play near the beginning of the game. However, when optimized, not only can she deal significant damage with some of her abilities, but she can also increase the damage that party members do, as well as draw cards for those characters, which makes her great in any group. Additionally, she has a chance to draw a card when she casts one of her cards if she's at full health, so you're going to want to make sure that you keep her at full health at all the times if possible. Doctor Strange is a really good support early on in the game before you've had a chance to optimize your deck, and he's got a card that will boost the damage of all damage dealing cards in your hand, and for the duration of the game once it's upgraded. This is really, really strong. It'll make your damage dealers perform even well, particularly before they've optimized their decks. It'll make you a lot more effective. And he also has another card that'll allow you to bring back attacks you've already used, and it will also give you an additional card play on the following turn. So that's really, really strong. These 2 abilities alone are what make Doctor Strange a really good support, particularly when you haven't optimized your deck yet. Additionally, with his passive ability, he can generate heroism every turn, which allows you to use your heroic abilities more frequently. So if you are in a group that needs a lot of heroism for their abilities, or their decks are set up that way, he's great at adding heroism to the group. And lastly, we have the Scarlet Witch, whose main gimmick is that she is very AoE focused. Many of her abilities are AoEs, whether they're dealing AoE damage, or whether they're marking targets in a big AoE, or whether they're commanding targets to attack each other in an AoE. She really has a lot of things that focus on many characters at once. She can also heal and give resist to your entire group if they're close to her, which is also great, helps support the team. But marking targets, in my opinion, is what's really strong about her, because marked targets will allow you to gain your card play back when you defeat them. So that'll keep your turn going if you can keep defeating enemies that have been marked. Of these 3 supports, I think that Scarlet Witch is probably the strongest of the 3. That's because marking targets extends your turn, and that can allow you to wipe out an entire board in one go, which is fantastic. And also her detonate ability, which can absolutely hit everything on the screen in one attack, is absolutely busted. Moving along to the damage dealers, first up we have Iron Man. Iron Man has a huge focus on redraws, which tend to boost the cards that he has in his hand. Instead of redrawing those cards, it adds an additional effect to them, whether it increases their damage or adds knockback or something like that. So you're going to want to have a lot of redraws at your disposal when you're playing Iron Man. Also, Iron Man has a huge focus on attacking multiple enemies at the same time with Surgical Strike and Air Superiority. So if you are playing on a map where there's going to be a lot of enemies, he's really, really good in that capacity, although he's also very good at taking out individual targets that are difficult to kill. Next up, we have Ghost Rider, who deals some of the highest damage in the game, in my opinion, but he's very tricky to play because not only does he have abilities that cost health to use, but he has abilities that do more damage when he's at high health, so you have to manage playing each of those types of cards at the right time, or they're not going to deal as much damage, or you put him in danger of dying. He also has a mechanic that allows him to gain more health as he kills enemies and use cards that give him souls, and as his health increases, those abilities that use his health also increase. So he has a huge focus on killing targets, and he doesn't like sharing the kills with any other character, so if you're playing in a group where another character needs to get kills or use environmental effects, he is not a good pair for those sort of people, as he really needs to get the kills in order to make the best use of them. Next up we have Blade. Blade's focus is bleed damage. He can put bleed on lots of enemies in this game, which deals damage to them over time, and he also has the ability to consume that bleed on them with one of his abilities, which will increase the damage they take instantly, not only from the attack, but from the bleed they have built up. This allows you to stack a lot of bleed on one enemy, like 8 rounds of bleed, and then consume it for massive damage, or to stack bleeds around on many targets and then kind of let them all bleed out on their turn. Blade is just an all-around great character. Not only can he deal high damage to many targets, he can also wipe out big targets at the same time. Very, very good early on in the game. Next up, we have Magik. She has a huge focus on portals. Not only can she create portals that she can then knock enemies through, only she can knock enemies through these portals, by the way, but she can place these portals in areas where there are explosions, so she can kick something through and it explodes, and then everything around it takes damage. But she can also boost the damage that enemies take while going through these portals. So not only are they going to take the damage from that explosion you knock them into, but they're going to take damage just from the attack and from going through the portal at the same time, allowing her to create an engine that just gets stronger and stronger as a round goes on. She is a bit harder to play, in my opinion, as you have to have her deck set up properly this way, but she does have a lot of abilities that don't depend on portals, so you can use those abilities early on while you acquire the cards you need to set up the portal strategy. And the last damage dealer is Spider-Man. He has a huge focus on striking multiple targets, as well as doing knockbacks, and he has a massive focus on environmental attacks. He is probably more focused around environmental attacks than any other hero in the game. Not only does he have a chance to save the heroism cost of any environmental attack he does, once upgraded, this passive also gives him the ability to play one environmental attack for free in a given round, which is great. And he also has a card that gives him free environmental attacks as well as more moves. So he is a great character if you want to use the environment to like weaken enemies or kill enemies early on, while you use another character who needs to play their cards to kill enemies, because he doesn't play cards when he's using environmental attacks, so that doesn't consume card plays. So he fits very nicely into a lot of groups, particularly with other damage dealers that are focused on using their cards. Next, we'll move to the tanks in the game, and first up is Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is an interesting character because essentially her strategy is play 3 of her cards as quickly as possible, use her Go Binary ability, which is free, which doubles her damage and gives her a good amount of block. And this lasts until she runs out of block, and then use her abilities that deal damage while her offense is boosted. So that's the primary strategy with her, which makes her an interesting character because she's sort of a hybrid tank, hybrid DPS. And her passive ability allows her to counter attacks or get a chance to counter attacks when she defeats an enemy. And counters are really strong with her because her damage is boosted by double when she's buffed with Go Binary. So if she has all these enemies taunted and they attack her while she's buffed with this, she can often one-shot them, clearing the board very, very quickly. Like other damage dealers, though, she has a huge focus on playing her own cards, so she's not going to work well in a group with other damage dealers that are focused using on their own cards. So she would be better with someone like Magik, who doesn't necessarily have to be set up to use her own cards, or maybe like Spider-Man or something like that. Next up, we have Captain America. Captain America's focus is drawing cards and gaining block. It probably generates more block than any other character in the game, allowing him to absorb probably the most damage without ever being in risk of dying. He also has tons and tons of card draw, and not just card draw for himself, but card draw in general, which allows you to get cards from the other 2 heroes that are in your group frequently. So he's very good at supporting other characters in his group and dealing some damage and absorbing damage at the same time, and he fits into just about any party nicely because of that. Next is Wolverine. Wolverine's focus is somewhere between DPS and tanking. He taunts a lot of enemies with his attacks. He deals repeated slashes that can be spread out over multiple targets or on a single target, not unlike Blade. And he doesn't deal a lot of damage early on in the game, but as you get further and further in and more optimized, he deals an incredible amount of damage for a tank. The difference between him and like Captain Marvel and Captain America is that he doesn't generate block at all. So his damage absorption is a little bit riskier because he doesn't have a way to mitigate that damage or give himself a damage bubble so that he won't be KO'd. However, he can heal himself by redrawing his own cards, and he has one card that can be played even if he's stunned or dazed that will heal him for almost his entire health bar and remove that effect. So he's very, very strong as a tank and DPS. You just have to be a bit more careful with him than you would maybe Captain America or Captain Marvel. And lastly, we come to Hulk. Hulk's mechanic is that he gains rage whenever he uses a smash ability or anytime he takes damage, and as he increases in rage, his damage continues to increase, and it can get up to astronomical levels to the point where he can clear the entire board in one attack. So the strategy with Hulk is to build up your rage as fast as you can and have enemies attack him to get that, or to just use smash as many times as you can, and then use some sort of board clearing ability. And what's really great too is if he has counter on him, every time he gets hit, he gains rage, and then he deals more damage with his counter attacks. So he's a really, really good tank, but he has less ways of mitigating damage than Captain Marvel and Captain America, so kind of like Wolverine, you have to keep an eye on his health. And lastly, we come to the Hunter character. The Hunter character is the main character, and I didn't include him in any of the other categories because he's sort of a jack of all trades. He can kind of do most of the roles effectively, although I would say he leans more to the DPS and healing side of things, the support side, rather than the tanking side. So odds are you're going to play him as a DPS or you're going to play him as a healer. so support or DPS, or some hybrid of it. I think early on in the game, you'll probably play him as a combination of both, as your deck is not completely optimized. And so you can bring him along in that support role or the DPS role to give you more DPS. And he doesn't have as much of a focus on the DPS side of things of drawing his own cards. So he works really well in a lot of groups because he doesn't necessarily need to draw his own card in order to deal damage. So that wraps up our video on all the heroes of Marvel's Midnight Suns. We obviously have a guide video for each of these heroes going into more in-depth, like which cards to play, how to play them, their strengths and weaknesses, etc. But this kind of gives you an overview of the characters, how they play, what their styles are, and who they might work well with, and what combinations you might want to put together. I really should have put this video out yesterday first before we did the builds. We were really busy and I didn't get around to it, but we have this video now, and if you have further questions in the comments, please let me know.